May our next lives part from authentic lamas and embracing ever the glory of Dharma. May I perfect the qualities of the levels and paths, and thus swiftly attain the state of Vajradhara.
Mel, before
Yes.
you start, if anybody wants the book, I've got it, of course.
Oh, you're the one I said. Okay, doesn't matter. Do that later. That book.
Yeah, I just want to say then, let me just put it in the chat. Okay.
The library's got it. Everybody, Corin, the librarian's got it. So let's do the 4 limitless contemplation rules, Burn, and then we're going to start. Have you got it? It's important, very important prayer. In fact, this prayer people can actually do as a full prayer in its own self, and I will explain it, but not now because we haven't got time. But okay, we just start. Boone, you haven't got it. But I'll start anyway. May all beings have happiness and create the causes of happiness. May they all be free from suffering and creating the causes of suffering. May they find that noble happiness that can never be tainted by suffering. May they attain universal impartial compassion, free of worldly bias towards friends and enemies. Sengjen damje dewatang dewe jutang dempa jujig dungal tang dungal chichu tang tra waju chik dungal mepe dewa tampa tang mindra waju chik nering chak tang ni tang drawe tang nom chempo la ne pa chik. We'll talk about that prayer another time. There isn't time now. We are a bit late anyway. But today I've called it Examining Individuality, Individuation, which is a term of Jung's, and Buddha nature, which is our part 3. And I was going to rush because it just seems to me when I'm teaching on these particular subjects that I'm teaching, more and more and more seems to come to me when I'm preparing stuff. I just get a whole lot of stuff. I get this in the post, I get this here, I get that there. And I think, wow, it's relevant. And I know that's that's really Guru Rinpoche's work happening when lots of things come my way that need to be given to you. So it's really important here because what we're going to look at in depth is individuality, which is your unique contribution, different to ego grasping. Ego and ego grasping is a different thing to individuality because we'll come to the details of it as Rob Priest gives it. But individuality means you can have your own individual looking at the Dharma and everything else. And it is interesting with Dzongsa Khyentse because he really respects the individuality. Who wants to do what? Who understands what? You have your own individuality. But as soon as it becomes tainted by ego grasping, it's no longer anything positive in Buddhism, that's for sure. Individuation, which I'll give you a definition later, individuation is a term Jung coined. Very interesting. But what's interesting about Jung is, I think Jung might have liked to call individuation Buddha nature because he definitely knew about the awakened nature. There's no doubt in my mind. But we have to remember where he was in those times. He was really in a time when it would never have been able to be accepted in those intellectual circles in Vienna or wherever it was. I mean, they would never have accepted something like you've got a Buddha nature, never. And they were very big intellectuals and doctors and psychiatrists and all sorts of things. So I think that's why he coined the term individuation, which I'll define for you later properly. But basically, individuation is actually where you go, what he called, to your bigger self. So the self with a little letter was nothing, and the big self was something beyond even your individuality, which is very much like Buddha nature. I think he was just using terms that could be acceptable in the West. Okay, so Buddha nature is your absolute space of everything. And I've been listening to some very interesting things, which I want to give you at some point. But James Lowe talks about the fact that the essence, which is our whole Buddha nature, the essence has the luminosity and awareness which comes out of it. And we focus, James Lowe said, on the movement, not on the essence. Now, there's nothing wrong with focusing on the movement if it's pure and clear. But if it's not, if it's ugly and awful, then you can't actually see the truth about your essence. And he says, we don't put enough into understanding the element of space, which is our essence. But of course, space in Buddha nature has got awareness, where space in nature hasn't got awareness. It just is the spaciousness of nature. But in your Buddha nature, it's got awareness in. So individuation is a very, very good term for those who maybe don't want to talk about Buddha nature. All of you are okay about that. But if you don't, if you're telling it to someone, you could use individuation very easily to give them what to do when they die and all of that. So that's why I like bringing it in, because I think that we have so many times when we are in Western society where people won't understand and talk about our terminology. So I think it's very important. So I want to start and then butt in whenever you want, because I was going to rush through today and then finish this series. But I thought, no, there's so much to actually say here. I'm not going to just rush through it. And you must be able to butt in, give your own individual opinions and your questions. It's really important. But this was a story you could see that I got out of the Citizen, long ago during COVID. I mean, it's actually deteriorating. I must put it into something or send it to Burn to type. But the thing is that it was such a beautiful story. It touched my heart in COVID. And I think it's a wonderful story of individuality, individuation, and Buddha nature. So it was in Bhopal in India when Indian auto rickshaw driver Muhammad Javed Khan saw people carrying their coronavirus-stricken parents to hospital on their backs as they were too poor to afford an ambulance. He knew he had to help. Khan, a 34-year-old driver in the central Indian city of Bhopal, sold his wife's jewelry and all his possessions and converted his three-wheel vehicle into a small ambulance, fitting it out with an oxygen cylinder, an oximeter to measure oxygen levels in the blood, and other medical supplies. Now, this was at the time they were writing about it. We've forgotten, thank goodness, about COVID. As India grapples with a harrowing COVID-19 crisis that has seen infections skyrocket and the healthcare system stretched to breaking point, individuals like Khan have stepped forward to try and help their local communities. A critically ill patient cannot be brought to hospital without oxygen support. So I thought, why not turn my three-wheeler into an ambulance? It's not as spacious as an ambulance, but it can surely save lives, Khan said. I see young people struggling without oxygen. Even when they call ambulances, the ambulances are charging 5,000 to 10,000 rupees, which is about 980 to 1,960. And how will a poor person afford it, especially during this pandemic when most people don't even have an income? A donor provided him with a cylinder and another with the oximeter. A doctor taught Khan how to use them. Many people have come forward to help me with donations and requested me to continue driving around until the pandemic is over, he said. It's thanks to the help of so many people I'm able to do this. I couldn't have done this in my own. But then he runs into trouble with the authorities because he hasn't got the right passport. I mean, in India, it's absolutely anal. If you haven't got the right, he didn't have the right permit and the right everything to do it. So they tried to lock him down. But what happened was, on social media, there was a terrible outcry. And so they couldn't keep him away. Everybody put it onto social media. And then he was issued with a special permit and a broadcaster added to it so that he could do his work. Anyway, I love this story. I cut it out right near the beginning of COVID. I thought it was such a lovely story because it really shows you that when you are in tune with your service, with your giving, and it doesn't have to be any great deeds, but when you are in service, the universe works in one's favor and creativity abounds, okay? And we need to use our individuality. I think that's what's so beautiful about all these lamas and these masters. They all have a different way. Some of them are strict, some of them are sweet, some of them are just kindness, and they have individual ways of dealing with us, and that makes it so beautiful because you don't have this set thing. And so, Karen, when we look at DeLog, and for you too, Bern, I mean, she's got her particular way. She's 16 years old. She's telling of her afterlife experiences and everything. She's telling them in a very, very defined way of the Buddhist. She came out of a very, very, very Buddhist community where she did everything to the book and everything that she had to do, and a very special, beautiful girl. And she had her contacts with white Tara and green Tara like me. So I really love the story. But it's interesting because the way she saw things is not the way we will see things. And she saw all of her lamas and her teachers in the afterlife. Well, we're not going to see them because we don't even know who they are. So, it's a bit of a different story, the DeLog story, but it's still nevertheless lots to teach us. Okay, and then the other story I want to give you, which is a very important one too. A businessman needed to attend a conference in a faraway city. He decided to travel on country roads rather than the freeways so he could enjoy a relaxing journey. After some hours of traveling, he realized he was hopelessly lost. Seeing a farmer tending his field on the side of the road, he stopped to ask for direction. "Can you tell me how far it is to Chicago?" he asked the farmer. "Well, I don't rightly know," the farmer replied. "Well, can you tell me how far I am from New York?" the businessman questioned again. "Well, I don't rightly know," answered the farmer. "Can you at least tell me the quickest way to the main road?" the exasperated businessman asked. "No, I don't rightly know," the farmer answered again. "You don't really know very much at all, do you?" blurted the impatient businessman. "Nope, but I ain't lost," the farmer calmly answered. "Nope, but I ain't lost." Now, I took this story because I think a lot of us are lost and we don't know we lost. That applies to the road, but I think in our lives, when I look at the television, when I look at everything, I think a lot of people are lost. Okay, and he doesn't know all the intellectual answers and all the physical answers, but he's perfectly happy within himself in his farmlands. So there's a big message there, and very important. And society, our families, our social media, all have such an influence on whom we purport to be. So James Lowe, in this talk it was called Being at Ease with Oneself, okay, he says, surely we are our history. Now think about it. In my bedroom, I've got pictures of my late parents. Joss has got pictures of his late parents, his auntie, quite a few people who've died. They're all on our walls in the bedroom, okay? And I look at them sometimes when I'm exercising or something like that, and I look at them and I think like, who are you all? I mean, you were my history and my husband's history. But who are you really? By now, you either have made it into the light, or you're in another incarnation with another family, with everything that you need. And so, what does that make me? I'm soon going to go as well. And why am he says, surely we are our history. He's just being sarcastic and making that question. And he asks, how can my spontaneous arising of myself come to be so that I'm at ease with myself in the moment? He's a psychotherapist as well, and he says he's always with people who aren't at ease. So am I. I'm always with people that are just not at ease with themselves. He says, I am who I think I am. Who I think I am. Am I my history? Parents, am I like you? Parents-in-law, is my husband like you? If I'm my history and I am who I think I am, and that's reinforced by who you think I should be or who you perceive me to be. Let's do a survey of all of you in the group and ask you, what do you think of Melanie? Okay, you each going to have a different opinion. Some people who haven't come back have got a really negative opinion of me, maybe, and they don't like what I'm teaching. So each person in the room sees you in a different way. And who are we? When we are who we think we are, our history, and that's reinforced by everybody else who they think we are. Just to give you a funny example, last night I was watching, we put on, my son arrived from the UK in the morning, and he's just here for a short time. And so we put on this movie we were watching called Damsel. Okay, I don't advise you to watch it if you don't want things that are scary, okay? But this movie, you see, so when the movie where the princess gets dropped into a deep cavern and she meets the dragon, okay, my husband said, first of all, I'm not watching this. It's such terrible stuff. My son said, Ma, what are you watching? And I said, leave it on, leave it on. I want to see what happens with the dragon. They all said, what are you talking about? So, I wanted to see what happened with the dragon and what happened to the princess when she was thrown into the pit. And then I said to Joss, you see, things aren't like they seem to be. I said, here is this princess. She's the sacrificial lamb. She's thrown down, and she's got to confront the dragon. And who is the dragon? None other than our own negative selves, our own embodiment of our shadow, of everything that's challenging us. And I was quite upset because she was a very special girl, and I expected her to tame the dragon. She did escape, but I expected her to tame the dragon. So this morning in my practice, I was saying to Guru Rinpoche, when do you subdue the dragon and when do you befriend the dragon? It's a very interesting thing with all our dark forces of who we are. But the thing is, I'll talk about that another time, but it's very interesting because the whole world influences who we think we are. And they think we are a fixed reality, So are we a fixed reality? How can this be when everything's changing all the time? I've changed since I saw you last week. I don't think I'm the same person. Watching that movie was really deep and profound. It went straight into my sleep state. We didn't finish it. It was too late. But I wanted to see the outcome of this princess who did escape. And she escapes through all the elements, fire, water. My husband and son didn't understand the first thing about it, but I said, that's called mythology. It's looking at things symbolically that are really happening in eternity. Okay, shame. A lot of people can't really do that, and I understand that, but everything's changing all the time. And we need to confront that darkness, and the whole world influences who we think we are, but we're not fixed. And no one really sees and responds to us no one really sees and responds to us in how we really are, except for some of the masters who actually see us for who we are. And they might respond in a very different way. You know, it's funny, when I'm with Lama Yeshe Rinpoche and I tell him something about my life, about what's going on in my life and everything, he often would say over the years, he'd say, I see. That's such an interesting response. I see. Because I see doesn't confirm anything to you. He just says, I see it as you are seeing it. It's a very interesting thing, because if people really went, I see, maybe we would feel much better, because maybe people would see us with our true potential. And the masters look right back in our lifetimes. They see all the positive imprints, the negative imprint. They see everything, not just the ego of this life. But our children, our families only see the ego of this life. And James Lowe speaks about people who have mental breakdowns. Now, it's very interesting. If you look at a person who has a mental breakdown, what really happens to them? When people say, oh, I've had a nervous breakdown. Okay, I want to say, well, what's a nervous breakdown? Well, I landed up in hospital. They put me on medication and I just had a total collapse. But if we look deeper, what is that nervous breakdown, that mental breakdown? Okay, they can't put all the aspects of the roles that they're asked to do and the demands that they're asked to do. They lose that ability to become that person with all the demands that are made on them, because maybe they're not really that person. Maybe they are an individual who sees things deeply. Look at what happened when I was watching the movie of the two intellectual people in my room. I mean, they were horrified with me for watching this dragon movie. I mean, what's wrong with you? My husband says, when you're watching a war movie and there's violence and blood, you say, turn it off, I'm not watching it. I go, yeah, but this is symbolic. And I can see deeper in this. So I really do want to watch it. It gives me good ideas. So when people have a nervous breakdown, maybe we should start a new thing. Maybe instead of actually landing up in a hospital on medication where they're just drugged out of their mind, maybe I should have a big room where they can gallop around inside and really see where they are, who they are, what they are. Just think of it. If somebody actually said, I can really understand this life has really become a bit much for you, what everybody's seeing you as. Who do you want to be? What role do you want to be? Okay, stop for a bit, find your truth. Get off the wheel of life in samsara and find your Buddha nature. You know, look at people with dementia and Alzheimer's. Now, two things I've observed happen to those people. We'll be talking about individuality, okay? First of all, some of them who've been quite fierce and positive and intellectual, they become the sweetest people. I've watched it with a whole stack of people. I'm not saying it's always the case. I've watched that. They become sweet and gentle, okay, when they lose it. Others who've been sweet and gentle, like we had an aunt who did that. She always did the right thing. She always said the right thing. I'm putting right in inverted commas. Okay, she always did the thank yous and did the right thing. And when she lost it, she became quite awful. She came out with really terrible things. But maybe those were the things that were truly in her mind that she'd never expressed for all the years. Maybe when you get dementia, you become more true to yourself. I'm just throwing this out. I know it's controversial, but I'm throwing it out because just lastly, and then I'm throwing it to you, and then you can make your comments, because I took my notes on Vajra Heart Revisited by Tulku Urgyen Rinpoche, and you know, he's my very best teacher in the whole world. Of all the teachers that I've had, that's the teacher that that's given me the most. And I just looked at something in the notes, and it said there, the main difference between Sem, that's the human conditioned mind, and Rigpa, or you could call it Sem-ni, the Buddha nature. Rigpa is the pure, open essence, spacious, really absolute, unlimited. The difference between Sem and Rigpa is that during Rigpa, when you're in a state of absolute openness, thought cannot take root. Thought cannot take root. He says it's like pouring mercury onto dust. So if you've got even an ugly thought, but you're in a state of Rigpa, it'll be like mercury on dust. It'll just run off the dust. But when you're in Sem, it's like pouring water on dust. So when you've got a thought and you're in your human mind, it becomes mud. It mingles and it becomes mud. Whereas with Rigpa, it just rolls off whatever is negative there. It mingles in the mud because Rigpa does not fixate on objects or fall under the power of thoughts, whereas Sem does. He says Rigpa is unobstructed, unimpeded. You can call it Buddha nature if you want, knowing without holding. So Rigpa doesn't hold on to anything. It knows, but it doesn't hold on to, least of all, a fixed identity. You can have your individuality, but a fixed identity means you're holding. And he says you act without ever being distracted. So you see what's going on. You're not there and there and there and there with whatever's going on in your mind, and does not lose continuity. Sem has no inherent stability. It just gets caught up and caught up and caught up. I want you really to understand this. And he said, Rigpa is nothing special or amazing. You are Rigpa. You are your beautiful nature. It's nothing special or amazing. But Sem, the human mind, and Rigpa can't coexist. When the one is present, the other subsides. Now think about that. We're using our human minds all the time. And so we're grasping onto our individuality, our everything, and nothing. And whereas Rigpa doesn't hold on to anything, but yet it's fully aware. So how much of that is in our lives? Tell me and debate with me, because it's really important. And then we're going on to the individuality, the individuation, and the Buddha nature. But just to give you some of the things there, because it's really, really important that you understand this fully. So tell me, ask me, say, talk. Let me hear your voices. Then we're going on to the other things. Anyone? Challenge, question, anything. I've given you a lot now to think about, a lot of other things that I didn't tell you last time. So tell me what you feel. What do you get out of this? Nothing? I can see you all intrigued with it, but what have you got out of it? Come on, loose. You've got a big grin on your on your face? What do you think? Betty, you do. Mans, you missed the beginning, but it's okay. My little Gail, Karen, Edith, what do you want to say? Anything, anything, anything. Please, Nicola.
Mel, I just want to say, as I always say, it's a lot of information coming in. To actually, for me to absorb it and understand it and then function using that's the difficult part, to integrate it all together.
And quite right. And you know what? Tulku Urgyen Rinpoche talks about that when he gives the difference between Sem and Rigpa. He says exactly that. He says when you start to try and absorb this, it's so difficult because, you can't get to it. But actually, if you keep on bringing the mind back to it and bringing the mind back to it and bringing the mind back to it, eventually you realize, if you just take one or two ideas from all the ones I've given you, as to not have a fixed self with a little letter, that makes you already so free. Because I know that people are expected to be exactly how their families want them to, exactly how their children want them to, exactly how everything. And then how do you let that spontaneous part come through? The only way you can do it is you try and you get it, and then it goes away and Sem takes over. Then you try again and you get it, and then Sem takes over, So you just do it over and over and over again until it starts becoming your momentum and your habit in your life. And it's so important what you're saying, what you've asked is so important, because it is really, really difficult. But how many people have got false personalities? I mean, I just remember once going to Sammy Ling, Denny, and I think it was my very first visit there. And I was really wandering around. I just arrived. Ekong Rinpoche was giving a course, okay? And you go into the dining room, everybody went. I couldn't even see where to get a plate or anything like that to go and eat. And I was really very lost in the beginning because there were so many people there and I didn't know anybody, okay? And you know what? I looked at all these people and I said, hey, these are Buddhists. What's your first thing you should do if you're a Buddhist, whatever a Buddhist is? I think we must leave that. If you're a Buddha, what's the first thing you do? You see a lost person, your heart goes out to them. I would go and put my arms around them and say, yeah, this is a bit much. I mean, you should have that sensitivity. You should have that awareness. You should have that spontaneity. I would go put my arms around them and say, I can see you look so lost. How can I help you? Okay, not one person of those 300 people that were there actually stopped and helped me 1 iota. Okay, now for me, it means they are putting on a particular act. I'm a Buddhist. I've got all these right ways of behaving. We have compassion. We don't hurt or harm any creature. Sometimes the spiritual path can then become another type of our personal pathology, to be this good person. You can't fake being a good person. You either are a good person or you aren't. And other people can feel it when it's in your blood, in your bones. So I'm saying to you, what you're saying is 100% right. But it's because we're so conditioned by all of our stuff from the past, our history. Do you know what I mean? So ponder this. actually you need very little from this. You just need to know that your spontaneous individuality can absolutely come out. And that if it's fake and phony, and we people pleasing and we fitting in, this can cause terrible psychopathology. And that's what I was talking about, Alzheimer's and things, you know. So think about that, everybody. Did you want to say something, Karen?
Yes, of course. When you went in, you had expectations.
Okay.
So that's something you have to look at.
Oh, yeah. I just maybe lost.
They're not you or they're not me. And they probably, I'm just saying, not judging, didn't see you, really didn't see you. And it's your sensitivity
that tells you to have that.
Yes.
True.
Yeah.
It's
So you'd be aware.
But you know what? What the Buddha said about awareness, which is so unbelievable, and we can go back to Taisitu's thing, when Taisitu said, when he asks a scientist if they know everything about atoms, the scientist will say, I know a lot about atoms, but of course I can't know everything there is to know about atoms. I can't know everything there is to know about atoms, but I know a lot about atoms. And Taisitu said, he said, I have total respect for the scientist and all his knowledge of atoms, but I will bow and have devotion to a Buddha mind. It's interesting because he said a Buddha mind knows everything. Now, the Buddha knew when there was an ant under his foot, and he never stood on that ant. He knew to walk around without looking. He knew everything. Now think about it, because it's absolutely true. But if you are unaware about how people feel, I know when I got my own center was something I really looked at very carefully. So when we had a big function or one of the lamas were coming, I'd always see people being lost and not understanding. Then I'd go and get somebody and put them there. You have to know with awareness. And you're right. They didn't. They were so involved in what they were doing, they didn't see it. But a Buddha nature knows that and knows and can see when people are unhappy, when people are not doing it. And it's that spontaneous compassion that we're trying to learn, if nothing else. Do you know what I'm saying, Karen? So yes, you're right.
I'm agreeing with you. I'm totally, I'm not saying I'm agreeing with you.
No.
I'm just saying that they're not you.
No. So what you want to say?
Can I say something else? I want to say that a lot of people, they're not present. Exactly. So if you are in your head, you're not even seeing the other person. Yeah. So this is the other problem.
Yeah. And Betty, that's the point. That's why I've given you Tulku Urchin's difference. Because if you're functioning in that spontaneous rigpa, you are aware and you are in the moment and you're not grasping.
Yes.
And, the thing that I am training my mind in the most of all my training is to become aware, and especially of other people, especially to see when people are lost, when people are heartbroken, when people are sore, when people are happy, to see that and respond, not by my determining how they should be. I mean, James Lowe is so funny when he gives his thing that I was telling you about in the beginning. He says, we go to a shoe shop or a big, a department store. He says, and then we've got a few friends around us, and then we see a pair of shoes and we go, oh my God, these are the best shoes I've had. And if I could get them in my size, this would be the most wonderful shoes I've ever seen. He says, and we say it. And when the other girl says, I don't like it particularly, we say, I should like it. It's the most beautiful shoe. It's so comfortable. We put our opinions onto other people all the time, what we want for them. Our parents put what they want for us, and obviously, they really obviously want the best. But how many can step back and look at a child that is different? How many can step back and say the child is different? Let me see how you are functioning. Let me understand that. Let me become aware of that. That's Buddhism. That's awakened mind. We've got to apply it, as Lucian's saying, in our everyday life. Because when our buttons are pushed, the I is in full force. And in Buddhist psychology, this is where ego grasping comes in full force to protect ourselves. And this in Buddhism is where suffering begins, because we either become aggressive or withdrawn, one or the other. So you're absolutely right, Betty. We're not present. And this is where the mix-up in individuality confidence is taught to be bad ego grasping, because individuality of us, or a self that is free and open to changing and to compassion and in the present moment and spunky and adaptable, is so positive and gets our pathway moving forward, not at all grasping and limiting, compared to an individual who either never feels good enough or is so arrogant and thinks they know everything and pretends to be what they aren't, and is stuck in a fixed, permanent, closed pattern. And this self doesn't exist. That's what the Buddha was trying to teach in Buddhism. Now, Gail, you're far too quiet today. It's not what you think. You're too quiet today. What are you thinking of all this stuff?
I'm a bit dozy today. I feel like I should still be sleeping. So I'm trying very hard to focus and concentrate.
Okay, that's lovely. But to use our individuality, which I'm going to give you the definitions now after we've had a meditation, is wonderful. And to use what we can. And I brought this beautiful story. And I love the story because next to it is a tiger sitting and looking. But the story goes like this. A man was standing outside of a building with a sign written, "I am blind, please help." A creative publicist was walking by him and stopped to observe. He saw that the blind man had only a few coins in his hat. He dropped in a few more coins and, without asking for permission, took the sign, turned it around and wrote another announcement. He placed the sign by the blind man's feet and left. That afternoon, the creative publicist returned to where the blind man sat and noticed that his hat was full of bills and coins. The blind man recognized his footsteps and asked if it was he who had rewritten his sign, and he wanted to know what he had written on it. The publicist responded, "Nothing that was not true. I just wrote your sign a little differently." He smiled and went on his way. The new sign read, "Today is the first day of spring, and I cannot see it." That's all he changed. Today, the first day of spring, and I cannot see it. And he says, sometimes you need to change your strategy, your individuality, when something does not go your way, and you'll see it may be for the best. Okay, now I thought that was such a lovely story, because I think that's what our individuality is about, that we can spunkily respond to something and adapt and change, not this fixed history that all of us look at. I'm a disciple of my parents. I've got this, I've got that, I hang on to this. We need a healthy, fluid, flexible, permeable sense of self. Because the Dalai Lama said it's really hard in this world to negotiate samsara without any ego whatsoever, which is very interesting, you know.
It's a matter about changing your view.
Exactly.
And you know what? We are not, we think we are hard and fast and set in our ways, but we can change it very easily. We just have to want to.
You just have to want to. And let me tell you what's beautiful is that when you want to, and this is for you, Luce, as well, when you want to, the universe works in your favor. That's what's so strange. I watch people, they're trying to change things to be the way their ego grasping wants it to be. And it just doesn't work out. I watch people. But when you're open and spontaneous, it just starts unfolding in a beautiful way. We don't have to interfere because we are open to the compassion, the energy, the spaciousness, the awareness of the environment. So interesting. You just notice everything that there is. This morning I noticed in the newspaper that for the first time, so there must be someone changing at the top, the DA had a big page, you know, giving their philosophy for the election, and the EFF had a tiny column next to it. And I thought, now that's interesting, because Malema has always managed with his ego grasping to get on the front page of everywhere. Now, it's very interesting if you notice that actually he's had less publicity lately. Let's see what happens. But the point of the matter is, you know, I always thought, why do people give him so much publicity, so much? Why do they? And so I was very pleased to see today that, you know, that there was there was less publicity for the people that are really doing negative things. And if we pray enough and really give the calls enough, we can get that to happen. But let's see what happens on Wednesday. We may still not be in any way to change anything in this country. I'm not sure. I hope we can. And I call to Guru Rinpoche all the time. So would you like to do a quick meditation? And then we go on to define those things of individuality. So go in your posture, your meditative posture. And I want us to breathe in and breathe out. And really, 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 Rob Priest says, to grow up in the West, we must become psychologically robust enough to cope with the alienation that accompanies our independence. So if you are on a spiritual path, the world can be relatively hostile, competitive, and insecure. And so we have to find what we need in order to be able to cope with that. So we're breathing in and we're breathing out. As we breathe out, don't hold on to a single thing. Just let it be. This is your real instruction from Tulku Urgyen Rinpoche, from all the masters. Don't hold on to everything. Somebody phoned me or texted me with a cry over the weekend. Melanie, I can't stop with these negative feelings. They just never stop. I try to do the things you say. I try to feel the things you feel and you teach, but I just can't stop that negativity. And so we have to learn slowly, one step at a time, to breathe in the spaciousness of the whole universe and all its possibilities, and and breathe out the real dark things we're hanging on to. The phony things that we're hanging on to. The things that are not true. Sometimes we admire somebody who can actually just be themselves. And we can't. We're inhibited. Just let that inhibition go and come to this moment. And I want you again to look down the path of history as though it were Dorothy wandering in the Wizard of Oz on her beautiful path of light. And when you look from the top of the mountain and you see yourself as a little girl, as a baby, coming into the world and skipping along the path, I want you to look at yourself and I want you to watch as you walk up that path. Some of you so shy and bashful, some of you full of energy and life and kindness, some of you so inhibited, you hide away. Some of you always wondering why it is that mom doesn't praise you, doesn't give you the things you want. Just watch your history along the golden path. See how you got to be older. Watch yourself through primary school, through high school. All the things that you hung on to, all your wrong attitudes, your correct attitudes. See how often there was no room for spaciousness. It was just absolutely cut and dried by the extended family, by the parents, by the teachers, by the schools, by the friends, and see whether you were able to break free or whether you stuck along the path you thought you ought to go on and didn't have the courage to be who you were. And as you're looking at yourself growing older and going through painful things and beautiful things and children and grandchildren, some of you, and different relationships and different pains and different sufferings and different joys, I want you to just take an overall look. Feel it. Feel it in your being. Feel it in your bones. Try now and see some of the karmic imprints of the repetitive nature of your lives. What kept happening to me. Similarly, an authoritarian parent, an authoritarian boyfriend, an authoritarian husband, an authoritarian teacher at school. Was there a theme? What were you supposed to do? Feel compassion for this little being who was really the sum total of her history, but maybe who could never be herself. Feel for her and give her permission, him as well, for being able to be what you really want to be now, not bound by all the morals and things that everybody wants you to be. What do you want in your free life? Is there heart? Is it too isolated? Is it aware? Could you reach out to all the suffering people in the world? Who are you? Did you see yourself as a limited being with a name and a history? Can you step back now and see yourself as a free being, doing all the things you want to. Some of you have always done the things you want to, and that's really fine and great. You allowed your nature, your individuation, your real nature to come forth. Some of you just stayed in line all the time. Can we have an individual way and still be true to the evolution of our spiritual ideas? Can we have our own thoughts and our own being, and still, which would question everything that we go through in our lives, and still be able to be part of what we really want in our lives? Can we trust in our inner feelings and what is appropriate for us, as Rob Priest asks us to? Can you trust that you've got inner feelings and something is appropriate, or do you always just give way or fight? Either one. This need not be seen, he says, just as a compulsion to be individualistic, but the natural desire to respect and validate individual differences in spiritual life. Just some kind of surrendering to come to a kind of peace where you're open to everything in your lives, to see, to be aware, and to notice changes in yourself every day. I think you're all busy pondering. Maybe I should have just taken you to the end of the session with it. Anyone want to ask or say? If you can put on your cameras, it's nice for me to know. I just want to say that Chogyam Trungpa says, we go round and round trying to improve ourselves until we realize this is the problem. Ego has to give up this good and bad stuff, surrender to Buddha nature, which is beyond good and bad. We often have a lack of self-acceptance and then pretend to be something we aren't. And that's where we fail. Okay. Like I know, Betty, you said that. You had your path really mapped out, and then all those negative things happened to you. They were the best, you know, all those deaths and things like that. And that's the best thing. Same with Boone, you know, when all those negative things happen to you, it's like so important to change something that needs to change in your life. And then suddenly you connect with it. It's amazing, you know. Gail, you were always quite an individual, weren't you? You didn't submit to what the world told you, did you?
No, absolutely not. And I got myself into a lot of trouble.
I don't know.
Yeah.
But you know, I think because when I look at Dzongsa Khyentse Rinpoche, who comes from the Tulku line of like the highest masters in the whole Tibetan lineage, just about. There are a few, but he's one of them. And he has got what is called in Jewish chutzpah. I mean, he just says it like it is, you know. He actually says it, and he makes you feel so comfortable, but not being perfect, you know. He says you can do Buddhism any way you like. I love that. You know, I love that because, you know, I hate it when people say, you have to do this 50 times and then you'll find this and this. But we have to know that some of the practices really help us to realize things. So we can't quit them completely because they're the ones that actually change things within your own self.
But also, don't you think it's the intention with which you do things? If you've got the right intention, that goes miles to furthering you and improving your situation.
100%. It couldn't be more, you know, more clearly put. And where individualism can carry a dark shadow, okay? And so that's the ego. The Buddha nature and the individuation doesn't carry a dark shadow. And so there can be that dark dragon that lives within us, and we have to awaken to it. But I want to give you a definition of how Jung used the term according to Rob Priest. He says Jung used the term individuation to denote a process of becoming a psychological individual that is a separate, indivisible unity or whole. Okay, so if you don't like that definition, he goes to individuate is to gradually actualize our innate capacity to live as a unique individual. That's so important. Like sometimes when I'm in really religious Jewish areas and people are arguing over which is the more kosher food or which is this road or which is that road, you look and you can actually see with awareness. You're not critically evaluating, but you can see with awareness. Concentrate on your intention, as you say. Don't worry so much if this is the right ritual and this is the right. Feel it in your heart, and then you'll be able to know. And as Jung put it, so it's actually the consequence of a process of awakening that releases our innate potential. As Jung put it, individuation means becoming a single homogeneous being, and insofar as individuality embraces our innermost loss and incomparable uniqueness, it also implies becoming one's own self. We could therefore translate individuation as a coming to selfhood or a coming to self-realization. But we may what may sometimes become confused, as Rob Priest says, is the distinction between the emergence of ego identity and the process of self-realization. That's what you're talking about, Gail. But the ego identity and the process of becoming self-realized, as Jung stated again and again, I note that the individuation process is confused with the coming of the ego into consciousness, and that the ego is a consequence identified with the big self, or the Buddha nature, if we want to say it, which naturally produces a hopeless conceptual muddle. He says, the self, the big self, or the Buddha nature, or Rigpa, whatever we want to call it, comprises infinitely more than mere ego. This is where we get messed up. Ego and individuality or individuation. Because ego is always, let me give this to you, and then I'll throw it open. As we individuate, that's the true process, we grow to recognize our individual relationship to a universal wisdom that has a unique expression because of our particular personality. So in other words, if you're a very quiet person, mostly, if that is who you are, that's okay. But we've got to look at the universal wisdom, how it can use that quiet being, or like me, a noisy being. How can I actually be used by universal wisdom in what I'm trying to do? We're trying to equate how your own place. Ego, if you're looking at your photography, you can see that the universal wisdom will put you into photography where you can help and serve people to see. It's very important that we understand to individuate, he says, is to expand the boundaries of our individual identity and our personality, to be rooted in our inner sense of totality. It is a growing sense of, in Jung's terms, the self as the root of meaning and the archetypal of wholeness within each of us. As we individuate, we can experience our own deeper spiritual heart, and then we begin to express it in the world. So remember, you've got that deep spiritual heart and you want to express it in the world. This expression of individuation enables us to have a quality of inner authority, integrity, and knowledge of what is true for ourselves. It enables us to open to our unique responsibility in the task of our life for the welfare and good of all. It's really important. He says, where individuation and individuality differ, and this is important, is that individuality leads to a separation. Remember that. If you separate, absolutely separate, that individuality is leaded. Let's say you're on a spiritual path, and now nobody wants anything more to do with you. It means there that your individuality leads to a separation and a sense of self-preoccupation that isolates us from others. While, as Jung asserts, individuation does not shut one out from the world, but gathers the world to oneself. This is so important, because what about people who go off into the mountains and never ever see anyone else and just do their spiritual practice for their whole lives? Is that true? Because if you look at the real masters who opted to go out of life, they always had people finding them. I remember Gambopa, who was a Kaju master. And I remember that Naropa asked Gambopa, I think it was Naropa who asked Gambopa, please go to the Gambo Mountains, or whatever it's called. That was miles away from everywhere. He asked him to go and live there. And Gambopa said to him, how can I go and live there? I'll be totally isolated from the world. And do you know that he went to live at the Gambo, whatever they were called, the Gambo, whatever, something like that, mountains. That's where he got his name. And thousands of people found their way to him to be taught. Now, how do you explain that? He was miles away out of life, but thousands of people found their way to him because he was in harmony with the universe. You've got to ask yourself that question all the time. How harmonious are you with the world, with the universe, with everything? Individuation is is the discovery of our own personal quality of wholeness that is intimately connected to our experience of the whole. We stand upon a threshold, he says, where the individual meets the universal, yet retains a unique sense of themselves. Does that make any sense to you? This inner sense of wholeness is then open to the interdependence of ourselves with all others. He says, I'm reminded of the metaphor of there being one light through the lamp, though the lamps are many. So it's really, really true. What he's really saying here is that if we go on a spiritual journey and we find that inner beautiful nature, if we go on a spiritual journey and we do it for ourselves, like the arhats do, they, right at the beginning of the journey, they do it for themselves. If we do it for ourselves, then it's individuality, not individuation, not Buddha nature, because Buddha nature connects with everybody wherever you are. It's so important for you to understand. If you ask, I'm not saying we don't need to take periods of time. You can be unique. You can have a unique sense of who you are, but it's always in touch and it always follows the interdependence. And I watch Dzongsa Khyentse Rinpoche, that I always give you him as an example, because he's a wild, modern, he's done stories, he's done movies, he's done, I mean, I remember somebody in his group, he had this huge group, and this girl came up and said, she came up to the microphone, it was a huge amount, and she said, Rinpoche, I might have told you the story, but never mind. She said, could we incorporate games for youngsters, for the youth, these computer games, whatever, gaming, could we please incorporate that for the youngsters? Is there a way that you could teach Buddhism instead of the junk, that people watch? You know how these children play these games for hours and hours and hours and hours, and they're shooting people and all of that kind of thing. And Rinpoche said, for sure we can. He said, send me a list of all the games there are. Okay. She said, are you serious? He said, send me a list of all the games. I'll get my people onto it. We'll find games that you can use in gaming. So maybe you do a game where what you do is greatly compassionate and helps people instead of shooting people dead, and there's no meaning in the gaming. In other words, it's got to be applied to what people can relate to. Now, it's interesting because we're really struggling in our center at the moment, and really, Cameron's told me we can't pay Nadine anymore. There isn't enough money. And I don't know if people are giving donations to the center or they're not bothering at all. But anyway, we have to change it, and we can't pay her, her salary. It's not a very big salary, but we can't afford it anymore. So he said to me, but I've got a young son who really, 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 he does YouTubing all day long, and he would be very happy to take your recordings and download them onto YouTube for you, Melanie. Said, well, that would be wonderful. And he said, what do you think about him altogether? I said, I think it's amazing. Why don't we? He's got a massive following on Instagram and whatever. He's got a massive following, and I don't even know the difference and everything. So excuse my ignorance, please, Luce. Okay. So he said to me, can we do something? I said, I think it would be wonderful. Why he's got this following of a few thousand people that follow whatever he's doing on whatever he's doing in his YouTubes and everything. I said, why don't we do a question and answer session for 15 minutes, that's all, on Buddhism and how it applies to the youth in this world. I said, I'll be so happy to do that. He asks me a question, I'll give the answer in terms of the young people who are interested in social media and all these kind of things, and give them beautiful answers. We can have 15-minute sessions, and then he posts them on his Instagram or whatever he does, wherever he posts them, and they are to teach Buddhism, but in a packageable way for people that would be really interested in doing it. And I thought that was a great idea. So if it happens, it happens. If it doesn't, it doesn't. But I'm just telling you that, you know, when things happen, then other things we're shown other ways. But we have to be in touch with that heart essence. So individuation is when we individuate, as Freud says, we come to the big self with a capital letter. And that big self is universal. It's not just, but it does have your unique qualities in it to go forth in the world. So it's really very important to look at this. And I thought, if we could do this with young people, if he's got a few thousand followers, and we just did, if he asked me things like, what's Buddhism? How can we apply it to our lives? How would we be able to use it? What do you mean Buddha nature? What does it mean? And then I would give my answers in terms of how young people see it, you know, something that they could actually relate to. That's Buddha nature. Or individuation and Buddha nature very closely linked. Maybe Buddha nature is a little bit more than individuation, but certainly individuation is along that road to Buddha nature, you know. So anyone want to ask anything? Because I think I'm going to leave it, and then we'll come next week to do, you know, the identity around a wounded self versus the identity around an individuated self that is okay with what's happening to you in the world. It's very important that. But I think we must do it next time, because I think you've got more than enough to do now. So anyone want to say anything? Ask anything, state anything. Sorry, all your cameras are off, all of you at the bottom. But maybe next time. Anyone? Are you all okay? Okay, then let's dedicate. And I'm so happy if you really do talk and give your comments, and please nobody think that my comments are not so good. I don't want it to be on the thing. You know, last week someone in the night group gave really her own facing of her negativity, and I got so many comments back on how useful it was. So whatever you ask, wherever you are, and whatever you are worried about is really, really, really okay. Shush, Jack. I've had enough of your barking today. So let's dedicate to all sentient beings who are suffering. There are so many people suffering. In Myanmar, the generals are at war with the people of Myanmar. In Sudan, the people are starving. In Gaza, in Israel, in everywhere, people are really, really struggling. The hostages, everything in the world is really struggling. Ukraine, it's very pitiful to see when you really look at Ukraine and you think, what was this war for? What's it for? I mean, there's no purpose to it whatsoever. And now Putin thinks he might want to make peace at his own, of course, at his own conditions and everything. And you look at all of this, we dedicate whatever small merit will come out of this teaching to all these beings who are suffering. And through this merit, may we all achieve all-seeing Buddhahood, and thereafter, once all harmful enemies have been defeated, may all beings be liberated from the ocean of existence stirred by the waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death. Sonam die tamche zipane topne nepe dranam pamshene jegana chipala trupai sipe sole doa do warsho.